We snooze, we lose.
It's a confusing time in Hawaii. Different views, philosophies, and interpretations of history have set up a tangled situation where today, state-sponsored elections and federal rulemaking initiatives have the Native Hawaiian community divided. Most agree that something must be done to address the lingering problems stemming from the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom late in the 19th century. But there are many differences of opinion when it comes to the remedy. As candidates throw their names in the ring to become elected as delegates to an upcoming OHA, or gathering, that hopes to establish a path for nation building, and as the federal government appears to support that effort, issuing their own proposal for rulemaking that will enable a government-to-government relationship, some prominent Native Hawaiians are saying none of it matters.
It's like people playing in a sandbox. It's make-believe. It really doesn't apply. And I'm not being sarcastic. It has nothing to do with anything.
Dr. Keanu is a political scientist at the forefront of an emerging understanding of Hawaii as an existing kingdom under U.S. occupation. Sai has been presenting his information, which he says is incontrovertible across the globe, most recently at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom.
A few weeks ago, I got back from a conference that was held at the University of Cambridge. And I was one of 15 academic scholars from around the world that was invited to attend. So the conference, the theme was non-European powers, in the age of empire. And it was a very, very, very good trip. I was there amongst colleagues. I didn't have to explain international law when I'm talking about Hawaii. I could just talk about Hawaii and what happened. And they all clearly saw Hawaii is occupied. It's not a political argument, it's just a fact. What they were more amazed at was the impact and the status of Hawaii back in the 19th century. Its impact on the creation of international law, the laws of neutrality, how Hawaii was the only non-European power that was an independent state. A lot of people really didn't know that. They thought it was just all European. They thought that Hawaii was similar to Japan and China and Thailand, that maybe we had unequal treaties. We're treated the same way. We're a country, but we're not recognized as being independent. One particular point that they were very, very interested in was the fact that Hawaii had an unequal treaty with Japan, where from 1871, the Hawaiian-Japanese Treaty, for any Hawaiian subject who gets in trouble in Japan, if they have to be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law, the court would be the consulate in Japan to preside as the court, and they will be punished under Hawaiian Kingdom law. So that is an example of unequal treaty, which means Japan was not recognized as an independent state. Okay. Independence, what that means is your laws exist independently over your territory. That's why the term independent is used before the word state. Because you can be a state, but not be independent, like Japan. Okay? So Hawaii was independent, and it was the only non-European power to be in the family of nations since 1843. The rest of the non-European powers became independent at the turn of the 20th century. They were shocked. They were shocked, and I actually had a lot of fun sharing with them history. It was great. It was great. These were all, the people that attended were all professors, PhDs that specialized in certain areas of non-European powers. So you had professors there that specialized in Iran, others in Turkey, Japan, China, Korea, Thailand. So you were selected based upon your academic expertise. So the people in Cambridge knew of my work, and that's why I was invited. And one of my doctoral students at the university was able to look at who attended, and before I went, he told me, Keanu, these are the shakers and movers in the academic world on non-European powers. See, because this PhD student, he's a candidate, his name is Lawrence Gunsher. He's the one that shared that with me. But Lawrence area is Hawaii's role as a non-European power. For me, my doctoral dissertation focused more on the legality and the politics and the political science of Hawaii being an independent state. So I was not familiar per se with these historians and political scientists that delve in these areas. I was more along the lines of historians and political scientists that deal more with the law, international law, US constitutional law, and so forth. So to meet them and to actually see who they were, I felt very privileged to actually be with them. They didn't know that Hawaii was British. Yeah, when I say British, they understand it's a nationality, it's not ethnicity. So I point out the fact that Hawaii joined the British Empire. Hawaii was not colonized by the British. In fact, Kamehameha was king. And what they were taken aback with was a lot of terminology derives from English governance in the Hawaiian Kingdom, like the term prime minister. Kamehameha the First created the prime minister position, you know, and the person he appointed as prime minister after the Battle of Nu'uanu, okay, was a guy named Kalaniʻimoku. And the prime minister under British law basically runs government. So you have the prime minister who is head of government as opposed to the king who is head of state. So Kamehameha couldn't do anything once the prime minister was created. He created it on his own along the lines of English governance. And the Hawaiian prime minister, Kalaniʻimoku, the foreign officers and foreign ships that came to Hawaii always knew they had to go through the prime minister, and they would call him Billy Pitt. And Billy Pitt was actually the namesake of the British prime minister at that same time called William Pitt. You know? So clearly everyone knew Hawaii was British, except us today and these scholars. So I explained to them as well that being a part of the British Empire helped accelerate Hawaii into the family of nations, because our government reform was along the lines of British common law, constitutionalism, and that's how Hawaii got recognized as an independent state, because our government was recognized as being effective, but also legitimate, and basing it on the rule of law. So the separation of powers, all these things. The reason why Japan, Ottoman Turks, were not allowed into the family of nations and why they had unequal treaties was because these countries were not satisfied that these governments of these other non-European powers were not capable of providing equal treatment, a fair process. So that's why they maintained that they will be prosecuted under their laws in that territory. They didn't realize that Hawaii wasn't only independent, it was actually a participating state since the Crimean War of 1854 in the development of the laws of neutrality. So Hawaii was actually a part of that process. You know, the United States president actually asked King Kamehameha IV to accede or to recognize this treaty on protecting neutral goods that it entered into with Russia, because they all knew Hawaii was pivotal in developing the laws of neutrality, because Hawaii was a neutral state. You know, so everyone recognized that. So Hawaii was carving its own niche within the family of nations as being a neutral territory, but also engaged in the economy, world economics. Another interesting point that I brought out with another colleague of mine up there in Cambridge was that Hawaii had over 80 consulates all over the world. 80 consulates. And consulates differ from legations or embassies. So legations or embassies are normally in the, not normally, they're always in the capital of the country, you know, and that's the representation of their government. Consulates, though, are always in the cities, outlying cities, where you have trade and commerce done by nationals of that country, not by its government. So the fact that we had over 80 consulates all over the world is an indication that Hawaii was very much involved with world trade. Back then you had basically 3 neutral countries that was recognized. You had Switzerland, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Hawaiian Kingdom. These were neutral countries, and neutral countries have a very specific purpose within international relations. Because war is legal under international law, these places were safe havens. So international law regulates the war, but also says when you enter into neutral territory, you have to disarm, where you can basically seek refuge. And then if you're going to rearm yourself to engage in battle again, you got to get out of the territory of that neutral country and then rearm, and then you go off and fight. So neutral territory or neutral states were very important to all countries it's their place, especially Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, when you may have naval wars. And that's why the Crimean War of 1854 was a crucial point for Hawaii, because Great Britain, France would join on the Ottoman Turk side to fight the Russians. You're naturally going to have naval battles in the Pacific, which you did. That's why Hawaii was approached to develop the protection of neutral goods while war is taking place, and not just the creation of neutral territorial laws. International law was already doing that, but neutral goods. How do you protect neutral goods from being confiscated, you know, in a war region, you know, or sea battle? So scholars thought that the first time a neutral state's territory was violated and war crimes committed was Luxembourg in 1914. Germany justified seizing Luxembourg in order to fight the French. Okay? Now for Hawaii, what people didn't realize, no, we were the first neutral country to be taken by the United States during the Spanish-American War in order to use Hawaii as a base to launch attacks against the Spanish colonies of Guam and the Philippines. So being up there was great. It's being amongst colleagues that know this. You don't have to try to argue it. You're just sharing it, and they see it. And we had some really, really good conversations. Really good.
In early 2014, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs began vetting a possible process towards nation building. The idea was not well received in Hilo.
What can you offer us that's enforceable at the end of this nation building process?
This here is a Trojan horse.
Many who agree with Tsai's findings fear the process will lead towards a situation similar to Native American federal recognition.
In 1936, the American Indians accepted federal recognition. They lost their land and their sovereignty. America's been here with a gun to our head 120 years. Not one election yet. Not one. What that tells you? What does that tell you?
As OHA planned the future AHA, behind the scenes, Office of Hawaiian Affairs CEO Kamana Opono Crab retained Tsai to help craft a letter seeking clarification from the United States Secretary of State, John Kerry.
Well, I was brought in by Dr. Kamana Opono Crab because he was dealing with what is called crisis management. It was brought to his attention that alleged war crimes are being committed by OHA, because the Office of Hawaiian Affairs is using money derived from pillaging. Because the state of Hawaii cannot be considered legal, it is collecting money from people. That's not called taxes. That's not called taxes. That's actually called robbery. It's pillaging. So these were allegations. And Dr. Kamana Opono Crab had to look into it as a part of risk management. You know? And he approached it in a very deliberate way. You know? First thing you do is start asking questions. So I assisted him and advised him on how to ask the question to the Secretary of State because of these matters. And what you're doing is, it's how you ask the question. Okay? Because Hawaii was a country, international law presumes it to still be a country. It's called the presumption of continuity. It's a legal principle, like the presumption of innocence. A person is innocent. They don't have to prove their innocence. The other party has to prove their guilt. What happened here is, because Hawaii is presumed to still be independent, the question posed to the Secretary of State, how did the United States extinguish the Hawaiian Kingdom? No? That's the question. And if so, it'll lead to the next question, then the next question. And that was sent off to the Secretary of State, who received it. Well, I know they received it. Yeah, it went by FedEx. And confirmation. That's why the press release went out.
The letter caused an internal uproar between the OHA CEO and the Board of Trustees. The board had the letter rescinded.
For the trustees to say they rescinded the letter, that is nonsensical, because a third party who didn't write the letter cannot rescind the letter. Now, they could have written a letter urging the Secretary of State to not answer that question, sure. But you don't send a letter rescinding a letter you didn't send. That's ludicrous. But they got it. The fact that they didn't answer is even better. You know, so if Hawaii was a part of the United States, that's an easy question to answer. Just show the treaty. But they can't answer it. So Dr. Crabb asked me to draft an opinion, a memorandum, that would explain Hawaii's status under international law and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. You know, because he says they have no information on that. None. All other people that were asked to write memos or opinions never answered that question. It's always whether or not federal recognition is viable, whether or not the Akaka bill will work. You know, you're already asking a question you probably already know the answer to. You know, so the whole point of getting people to write opinions is to get questions answered that you know you don't know. That's how you inform decision making. So I drafted it and explained it in detail why the allegations of war crimes are serious and real. And that created a firestorm amongst people because one of the reporters from the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, Rob Perez, I didn't like his article. I didn't like it. And Rob Perez was very subjective the way he wrote it. It was almost like accusing me of stealing from OHA, you know, and it was crazy. And then to use all these terms like I was a former criminal, you know, indicted, they don't even know what it was for. And Rob knew. He was there at Perfect Title Days. It was all manufactured. But the rhetoric, I said, you know, you need to also, you're talking about me getting paid $21,000. Others are getting paid $75,000. John Waihe's firm in Washington, who is promoting this, you know, lobbying in Washington, they're paid $3 million. Yeah, and you're saying I'm ripping off somebody? I'm just doing my job. But that's how he wrote it. Now, what's interesting is he tried to get a copy of the memo before he wrote that article from OHA. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs refused to give it to him, claiming attorney-client privilege. It didn't fall under attorney-client privilege. I knew that. Yeah. So he finally was able to get it through the Freedom of Information Act. That's how he got the memo. So when he got the memo, now OHA released it. Now everybody got it. One particular person that got it after the story was let out by Rob Perez, the skewed story, Professor Williamson Chang read over it. He and I met and I asked him, I said, Bill, is this probable cause or evidence of war crimes? He said, yeah, there is evidence here. You know, he's not, because I'm not saying they're guilty. I'm just alleging these are war crimes. And I said, Bill, let me bring this to your attention. The United States federal law, Title 18, Section 2441, defines war crimes as felonies. And he goes, oh, he didn't know that. Then I said, look at the other section in Title 18. It says, if you know that a felony has been committed, you must report it unless you commit a felony yourself. And Bill read that. He said, oh my God, that applies to me. I said, yeah. So that's what prompted Bill Chang to report to the Attorney General Holder war crimes in this memo. And I just recently spoke to Bill Chang. I said, have you received any word yet from the Attorney General's office? No, just the letter thanking me for the information and they'll get back to me. So I said, wouldn't that imply that war crimes are being investigated? Because if there were no war crimes, they would have come back and said, there are no war crimes. So therefore, you are not going to be penalized under this certain section for not reporting it. Yeah. And he said, no, I guess it is so. I said, yeah, it's still going. And that also ties into the Swiss criminal case, the war crimes case that deals with taxation and so forth. So yeah, they're all connected. Well, what's also really good is Bill Chang, Professor Chang, just came out with a law journal article that was just published called Darkness Over Hawaii. And he basically, in this law journal article out of the University of Hawaii Law School, okay, basically says why the courts are illegal and the issue of subject matter jurisdiction is a reality. And he lays it all out under American law, why Hawaii is not a part of the United States. So it actually complements my work, which is more international, yeah, and Hawaiian. It fits very well. So here's another law professor who has published a law journal article on this very topic. So these issues are not, they're not subject to people's opinion. It's actually subject to people's qualified opinion. You know, everyone tries to argue with each other, all based on a false premise. This information and what I presented in Cambridge and my law journal articles, these papers have been vetted. You just don't write something and get it published in an academic journal. You have to deal with an editorial board that goes back and forth with you. You know, it's a very lengthy process, you know, but people think that, oh, that's just an article. No, it's an academic article, you know, and that's important. It means that it was either law reviewed or peer reviewed. So here's Bill's article that is law reviewed. I have articles that are law reviewed. This is our area, this is what we do. And again, it's just really a part of education. People need to know, but people have to be careful.
The Department of State never answered the questions posed in the letter, but soon the Department of Interior interjected itself into the discussion. In July came a round of DOI public hearings on proposed rulemaking for a new government-to-government relationship between the United States and Native Hawaiians. Again, Tsai's influence could be heard in the resounding no from the crowd in Keaukaha.
This whole thing is a slap in the face. And you need to go back and tell President Obama and Mr. Kerry, whom we have great respect for, but to be serious and treat us seriously, because we have always honored America and given you aloha.
First, we need an answer to Kamana Opono's question to the Secretary of State, Kerry, before we go any further.
No to everything that you guys are wanting and everything that you guys are wanting to do. Because we can do it ourselves. We have our own government. We have the Queen Liliuokalani, and the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist. You need to learn that Constitution so that you can know when to ask permission to come into the Kingdom of Hawaii. You did not ask that permission, and I don't know who invited you in, but they did the wrong thing.
We who come from an ancient and powerful lineage seek recognition from a government who is culturally immature and morally and economically bankrupt.
Despite the opposition, both the federal government and the state are moving ahead. OHA has funded its Na'i Aupuni process, inviting those whose names have been listed on a Native Hawaiian roll to vote in an upcoming election of delegates. Last week, a court judge ruled the election is valid under U.S. law as a private poll and therefore not subject to a race-based nullification like past OHA elections. The plaintiffs are appealing. Meanwhile, the Department of Interior supports the Na'i Aupuni process. The whole thing has left the most active of independence-seeking Hawaiians divided on the best path forward. To that, Tsai has simple advice.
It has nothing to do with anything. The Department of Interior can only operate within U.S. territory, period. That's just the way it works. The only department that works outside of U.S. territory is the Department of Defense and the State Department. So at the hearings of the DOI, what was being told, and I heard this quite often, is it's the State Department that should be here, not the Department of Interior. Because the Department of Interior can only apply their rulemaking to people that are within its territory. We're not in its territory. So we're still right back at square one. Now, I think what is fueling the confusion is the use of terminology, yeah? And the use of the terminology. So the term self-determination was used in the U.S. Apology Law of 1993 when the United States apologized for the illegal overthrow. What people don't realize is that apology law is riddled with misinformation and terminology that doesn't apply to Hawaii. You know, so,
Indigenous, right? Was that one of them? Yeah.
Yeah. So the three terms that are used constantly, and you see it in Act 195, Ka Na'i Olowalu, and the Native Hawaiian Convention, Na'i Aupuni, is the terms such as self-determination, inherent sovereignty, and indigenous people. Those are consistent. Now, strictly from a political science standpoint, yeah, and a legal standpoint, self-determination is a legal term, okay? It is a term that applies to people that have not become their own country, okay? That's what it means. And it implies you have a right to choose what you want. It's called nation building. Well, that term wouldn't apply to Hawaii if Hawaii is a world power since 1843. That's like saying in Great Britain, a tribe in the land of, let's say, Scotland, has a right to self-determination. No, they probably don't, but they probably have rights under British law. And Scotland as a whole may choose to break away from the Union, yeah, but they chose not to. Okay, so you have to apply it to entities that are not countries. So when Scotland was trying to vote to become independent, that means you're not independent. And they were exercising self-determination. Yeah. So by speaking to self-determination with Hawaiians, one, you're implying that Hawaiians have a choice to become their own country, which implies they were never a country, or that country was overthrown in 1893. It's all based on misinformation. So now here I'm at Cambridge. They know that. So Na'i Aupuni actually is just, it's nothing. It's like another sovereignty group. That's all it is. Coming out of this long sleep that we were in. You know, we're starting to get used to this idea that we're not a part of the United States. And it's okay. I mean, but there's definitely a way to fix it. In fact, I did have 3 meetings with Mike McCartney, Chief of Staff of Governor Ige, before he left for Japan on that last Japan trip they took. Lieutenant Governor Shan Tsutsui was named in a Swiss criminal decision as an alleged war criminal. You do not name names as alleged war criminals. That's a very serious matter in a court case, in a judgment. So by stating Shan Tsutsui as an alleged war criminal of pillaging, my concern for Mike McCartney was that Shan Tsutsui is still on your staff. He's a carryover from the Abercrombie administration, who Abercrombie was identified as an alleged war criminal for pillaging. That prompted a meeting with Mike McCartney and I. It took place 1 meeting a week. Each meeting was about 2.5 hours. This was in his office on the top floor of the Capitol. He saw it. He saw it. He realized this is big, and I just advised him, be careful. This is not a game. So that, I gave him a report, okay, that laid out how this problem can be fixed. And this is not done in a vacuum. This is done with precedents, rules, and procedures. Very doable. I actually provided that to him. That report, I incorporated into my Cambridge paper. So when people read the Cambridge paper, they see the bigger context of the problem, but they also see the solution. And that's what's important. People need to understand what's going on. And things are going to change when you identify who are really the decision makers and who are merely those that are affected by decisions made. Because sometimes you may think somebody is a decision maker when in fact they're not. They're affected by decisions made. Hawaii is in the international arena. We are not limited within the US purview. America is part of this, but they're also in trouble as well. So there's a way to fix it, and it has to be done responsibly. But education is the basis to get people on board to understand what's going on, and not necessarily, oh, I'm going to do something. Well, the best thing to do is get educated, because this is our country. The state of Hawaii government is actually the Hawaiian Kingdom government. It never changed. All it did was change names. You got the same police department here that goes back to 1840s. You got the same courts. It all goes back to the kingdom era. But we've been led to believe it's not ours. America created it. That's part of the propaganda.